Brock Pierce has been recorded going to Little St. James. He's referenced 1,800 times in the Epstein files. Epstein funding via MIT swoops in. The kind of people that we're talking about are just pure evil. They love chaos. The trauma is the point. They are essentially allowing the central banks to financialize our last best chance at freedom money. The thing that we should be doing is creating alternative implementation. So instead of having a big Twitter war, we just do our own thing without compromising the protocol at all. There's been so much PTSD in the community about the block size wars that we can't even get things done that we all agree on. It worked at maybe 6 billion. It doesn't work at 1.5 trillion. A lack of alternative implementations has become a serious risk. I basically proved that there's this concentration of power in Bitcoin Core's maintainers.
Welcome back to the Bitcoin Nova. I have Secure Sovereign back with me today. He is a technologist who recovered a 14-year-old Bitcoin hard drive. You can check out our last episode. It's linked in the comments to find out about his incredible story. And today he is here building in Bitcoin because he gives back to the network that saved him. So, his work is not out of necessity. It's because of gratitude and passion for a secure, sovereign future. So thank you so much, Secure Sovereign, for joining me. Josh, actually. So, I just call you Secure Sovereign, but yes, Josh. And thank you again. And I'm so excited to get into what you are doing today for the Bitcoin network. And it's going to be great to explain it and to help people understand why it's important.
Absolutely. Well, I appreciate you taking me for this interview call, and let's dive into it. Let's get spicy.
Yes, I know it's going to be a good one. I mean, it's definitely good to ask questions. I mean, that's what we're all about. We're not, we don't trust, we verify as Bitcoiners. We are curious and we ask the hard questions and we look for the solutions that some people don't always think are the easy route, but that's what we're doing. We're building a better future here. So you started bitcoincommons.org, and it is a Bitcoin
node. thebitcoincommons.org.
Thebitcoincommons.org.
Yeah, easy mistake.
Yes, thank you. And it's a Bitcoin node BLVM, and you'll have to explain to me what those mean again, because I'm still newer at some of this stuff, but it is a code-based commons without authority. So coordination without authority. That's what your page says on X. So you guys can go follow that page as well. He has it linked in his profile. Is it secure _ sovereign, or
it's SEC sovereign?
SEC sovereign is your username on X, and you could find his.
And the Bitcoin Commons X profile is at BTC Commons.
Perfect. So let us know however you want to start this. How do you want to start this conversation about why you did it or what's important about it?
Well, from a personal perspective, I was just developing Bitcoin software and started to think very critically about Bitcoin governance. I have a long background in open source development. I understand how GitHub works, I understand how open source projects work. And I immediately identified what I thought was a concentration of power in the maintainers. And I had been out of the game for a very long time. I didn't have the historical reference points that a lot of the people who had been in the community had. I just could tell that there was this concentration of power. I didn't want to come out and just say, oh, the maintainers control everything and it's an oligarchy. So I did a quantitative governance analysis of the last 16 years of public data that I could find, which wasn't everything, but it was a good bit of the data. So something like 500,000 IRC messages, tens of thousands of mailing list messages, all the GitHub pull requests, issues, reviews, so on and so forth. And I tried to basically quantify the concentration of power and prove the oligarchy rather than just speculate. And I think I did that. I think I basically proved that there's this concentration of power in Bitcoin Core's maintainers. And I'm not even saying that these are bad people or, they necessarily deliberately set it up this way. I think it's just sort of a function of how GitHub works and how open source projects work, and the amount of effort that it would take to do something different or devise something different would have been very expensive and outside of the wheelhouse of most of these people. So the fact that they didn't do it is not something that I don't blame them for that. But nonetheless, I still identify this concentration, and I think it's something that's worth talking about.
Yes, it is something we're talking about. And also, the timing of this is very interesting because I always say I don't believe in coincidences. And one of the things is that when you started doing this work, it was because of a lot of the talk about the arguing between the node implementation between Bitcoin and NOTs that was happening, and with the Bitcoin Core 30 that was coming out, which was coming out in the fall. So I want to know about more of the timeline of when you started because it's interesting. You're seeing this concentration of power, and you wanted to prove that there is this concentration. So I want to know how you prove that, but as well as the timing of these Epstein files that have just been released and finding out about the funding that happened to early Bitcoin development, to Bitcoin Core. And it just kind of hardens whatever proof you did find.
Sure. Yeah. So I guess initially I fell into Bitcoin right in the middle of this ordinals drama and this whole Bitcoin Core versus Bitcoin Knots debate. And well, on one hand, I'm identifying maintainer concentration, and on the other hand, I'm seeing this whole Core v Knots debate, and I can't rightly sort of criticize Core for having maintainer concentration and then advocate for an alternative, which is mostly Core that has an even worse maintainer concentration. Which again is not blaming either of these camps. I'm simply saying that there's a structural problem, and it's with how we manage this code base. So I guess then the question became like, how did we get here? I did this governance analysis, and then my kind of conspiracy brain turned on, and these Epstein revelations came out, and I started to build a thesis for how we got to the place that we're at. And it's it's kind of ugly, honestly. I am, for the record, I am not saying that Satoshi Nakamoto is Epstein. Not saying that at all.
Yeah.
That that seems completely absurd to me. Um,
It
how,
it
yeah.
100% is absurd. I mean, it's
Yeah.
seriously a narrative, right? Because the normies that I speak with day to day, I don't hear a lot of people asking me about Satoshi ever in real life. And I am around a lot of normal people at my everyday job, and they know I do a Bitcoin podcast. And I can tell you in the last week or two since these documents came out and this information came out, I've had a good amount of people asking me about Satoshi being Jeffrey Epstein, and I just can't take it. It's ridiculous.
So I'm gonna give you some what I think are pertinent details in terms of the history. And for the record, I had to kind of go back into the historical record to find this stuff.
Mhm.
I've talked to core developers who were there at the time. They've confirmed some of this, and I actually do have sources for everything I'm going to say. So I will happily send that to you
Mhm.
after the fact, so you can put it in the show notes or however you want to do it. So
Like,
don't trust me.
verified.
Absolutely verify everything I'm going to tell you. So basically, we start with the Bitcoin Foundation in 2012, which was modeled after the Linux Foundation. They lost $7 million in about 2 years. And by November 2015, they only had $12,000 of total assets. At that point, and around, it says Brock Pierce was elected as the director in May 2014, and 9 members of the Bitcoin Foundation resigned immediately. Okay. Now, Brock Pierce, he is has been recorded going to Little St. James. He's referenced 1,800 times in the Epstein files. His relationship with Epstein continued into 2018. He co-founds Tether in 2014. Um, he brokers at Epstein's 3 million into Coinbase. an investment to Coinbase. He basically sets that deal up to some extent or another. He introduces Epstein to Larry Summers, who's a very prominent person with the central banking system, and then he is the chair of the Bitcoin Foundation when it dies, when it collapses. And this is exactly the moment that the Epstein funding via MIT swoops in to save the day. They're going to come save Bitcoin.
Mhm.
So
Yeah.
DCI, which is the Digital Currency Initiative via MIT's Media Lab, a lot of this is already public. A lot of people know all this already. They fund DCI, Epstein funds direct donation to them to the tune of $525,000. And then total direct donations to MIT is $850,000. The $525K is inside of that. So that's included. And then additional money facilitated in 2017. Epstein got other people to donate on top of the 850K that was another 750,000. And overall, between the Epstein network and everybody involved, Leon Black, he managed to get about $7.5 million into the MIT Media Lab. But not all of that ended up at Bitcoin Foundation. A significant amount did, or at least a substantial amount did.
Right.
Um,
So Brock
now,
Pierce, when you
yeah,
said going back to Brock Pierce, how all these people resigned, what happened there?
that's a really good question. I could look into that more deeply. I don't have
Yeah.
the answers there, but my understanding, I guess, is
We've
that
got rabbit holes.
yeah, there's so many rabbit holes. My assumption would be that his reputation preceded him.
Mm.
Or he was just such a disagreeable person that that just doesn't happen. Like people
Yeah.
don't just leave, especially every like 9 people all at once. So there's more to be said there for sure. We can only fight so many battles. So,
Right. I mean, it's like we already have all these people that you're like, they went to the island, all this stuff. And you're just like, man, every one of these people. Anyway, go ahead.
yeah, no, it's totally fine. So MIT staff internally called Epstein Voldemort, but still took every dollar. So basically, they knew they couldn't mention that he was involved, but they
Wow.
still took his money. So, and by the way, I'm not suggesting, and it is pretty clear to me that the Bitcoin Foundation developers who ended up receiving the money, they didn't know that that's where the money was coming from. And in fact, as it says here, MIT staff explicitly made sure to leave him out of anything that they were saying so that people were misled in as
But
far
here's
as
the thing, even if it's not him, okay, so they didn't know that he donated the money. But then you have people like Brock Pierce, and whoever the other person you mentioned, who worked there, who were friends with him, going to the island, you know, so it's like they infiltrate by, okay, I donated the money and I put my people in.
right. And then, and that leads to the next thing was Joy Ito wrote to Epstein in 2015, quote, "We used gift funds to underwrite this, which allowed us to move quickly and win this round. Thanks." And he also said, "Many organizations scramble to take control of the developers. This is a big win for us." Now, a lot of people would take issue with this framing. Bitcoin developers themselves would take issue with this framing. They would say, well, nobody ever took control of us. And I agree, actually, that was their framing of what had happened. They
Yeah,
were under the impression that they had taken control. They had won this round. And I would argue, when you're dealing with influence peddlers and stuff, they're not talking about absolute control, like, they're the puppet masters. They're peddling influence. They're putting themselves in the room with the people that matter so they can be the ones who get to say the things when it comes up, whatever it is. Okay.
mhm.
So
And in their view, they're
yeah,
thinking, yes, we're in. Yes, we're going to be able to implement influence of certain kinds that might benefit us. long term, when it comes to Bitcoin. But that's what we, were discussing before we got on, is that I like saying this quote that I saw. It's not, the story isn't that Epstein funded, Bitcoin development. The story is that Bitcoin defeated that evil, Bitcoin won, and it didn't allow for this monopoly of, the core development or whatever. It's not just, not that they were bad people, but the fact that he donated to this specific, um, you know, implementation of Bitcoin. It's they wanted to be the monopoly in the node implementation part of it, and it doesn't seem to that they're able to make changes without the community rising up like an immune system. So the fact that people people spoke out about it, Bitcoin miners voted with their miners, and that is amazing. And these attacks, again, this is not the end. It's not like, okay, Bitcoin won and this is it. There's going to be always more influence trying to come into Bitcoin. And that's, I guess, where you're going with this eventually.
100%. Yeah. So this is kind of where I just want to set the stage for
Yeah.
that. This
Sorry,
is,
I'm like, so my mind is
no,
just jumping.
you're good. It's like, it triggers a lot of things. So,
Mm.
I guess this is kind of where I get into the block size wars. And so my thesis is essentially that for evil people like that, they didn't really care, or they didn't care at all about the block size. Um, the and people have argued this 10 different ways, but I think that if you take a hard look at the files, and it's a terrible thing to have to do, but the kind of people that we're talking about are just pure evil,
Mhm.
and they get off on being evil. They harvest trauma. They love chaos. And I think from their perspective, it wasn't about the block size. It was about simply manufacturing as much chaos and uncertainty as doubt as they possibly could. They knew they couldn't inflict some particular change. In fact, they were seeing firsthand what trying to change the block size was doing, you know, and all the pushback they were getting on that. So, why not just keep pushing this losing battle and just create as much uncertainty as you possibly can? I mean, putting yourself into their evil head for a second, and then that drags on till 2017. And
And they probably get a rush out of, yes, like, look at the chaos we're causing, and look at the angry people, and just the anger in general. It's like, you're right, the kind of people, and yeah, it sucks to look at those files and see what they do and have done. But at this point, when the layers of the onion are peeling back and you're seeing these things, you have to be aware. It sucks. And I don't want, like, there's points where I see things and I don't want to, but that's why these people get away with what they do for so long, because people choose to look away.
100%. Yes.
Mhm.
And so, but still, that's a great point. And I would say also, you know, uh, the trauma is the point. And I think you can just look at the results, and the results, to my mind, are for the last decade, there's been so much PTSD in the community about the
Mhm.
block size wars that we can't even get things done that we all agree on.
Yeah.
Like, for example, they've been trying to separate the wallet code from the node code for 12 years. And that is something every single software developer on planet Earth, anyone who's ever done any software architecture, would agree that should be done. It probably should have been done initially instead of many years later. It should have been done right off the bat. And, because I would argue, because of the paralysis, because of the
Yes.
attrition in developers, which is partly related to the paralysis, then simple things like this, things that we all agree on, aren't happening.
Mhm.
But to get back to the block size wars for a second, I will point out, to Gavin Andresen's credit, in 2014, before the block size wars, he actually does call for multiple implementations. There's a
Mhm.
speech from him at Princeton where he very explicitly says at the beginning of the speech that something to the effect of, Bitcoin should be like TCP/IP, or it should be like the web, and where we've got multiple web browsers and we've got multiple email clients, and it should be a protocol and there's multiple Bitcoin clients. And then he
Uh-huh.
insinuated that in 6 months or 2 years or something, that he expected that there would be multiple Bitcoin clients that all follow this protocol, and that Bitcoin was the reference implementation. And when he said reference implementation, he didn't mean only implementation. He simply was thinking in terms of how a normal engineer would think about this. This is the reference by which all of these other implementations should emerge. Problem is that right at this time, this was 2014, where he's pushing for this. This is exactly when everything starts falling apart, exactly when the money starts flowing in, and then the block size wars erupts, and then he and everyone else gets consumed by the block size wars. These alternative implementations never emerge. BTCD, they try to do an implementation, and they get pretty close. They go to the what I call the oligarchy, and they're basically pushed aside and said, we're not interested. Lib Bitcoin, they have put together an alternative implementation. It's not, the node isn't fully released yet, but they've done a lot of work, and they probably should be uh, brought into the inner circle for the amount of work that they've done and the effort they've done. But they're not able to get funding, and Eric is on record saying that the lead maintainer of LibBitcoin is on record saying that a core developer basically warned the person who was going to fund them not to do it because it was dangerous to have alternative implementations.
So
So,
dangerous. How?
it could fork the chain. We only can have one implementation because if somebody else has an implementation, it might be a hard fork. And that's true. There's definite truth in that. However,
Well,
okay, well,
the
let's, yeah,
danger.
go ahead.
Okay, go ahead. No. Let's. Yeah, we'll get to that. But then, okay,
Well, so then but I'm kind of jumping ahead here.
okay.
But basically the, the question is, what is consensus? Okay. And so in order for you to have an alternative implementation to Bitcoin, the first thing you have to define, and very clearly, is what is consensus. And there is no specification for what is consensus. There's no mathematical proof somewhere that says, like, this is what consensus is. And if you were to create your own alternative implementation of Bitcoin, you must therefore follow these consensus rules. And then the question is, well, obviously consensus exists. So what is it then? It's somewhere. If there's no specification, where is it? Well, it's embedded in 300 to 350,000 lines of C++ code, and it's entangled with everything else. So you have to be basically a master of multiple disciplines in order to even figure out what it is, much less extract it out of the code. But that's a that's a technical thing that we can get into in a minute.
Mhm. Yeah.
Um,
So, and the
yeah.
thing that I think, and I don't want to jump ahead, either, but when it comes to Gavin Andresen bringing this up, and then because of all the drama with the block size wars, it was just not talked about again.
Pretty much, yeah.
Yeah.
I'd say that all of the institutional energy was consumed by the block size wars, and there were two things happening at the same time. There was the block size discussion, and then there was the governance discussion. And the
Well,
governance
and then I
discussion,
think I think
yeah,
because the block size wars were about, changing Bitcoin as far as, forking it, right? Because that would have forked Bitcoin or created changed Bitcoin fully. It would have,
sure.
you know, forked Bitcoin, created a new version. And that's just for people who don't understand what a fork is. But
It's
so
not
that's
backwards
why,
compatible. That's
yeah.
the
So
key thing.
that's why this became a fear and something that we're like, okay, if you're going to talk about governance, now we're talking about other versions of forking Bitcoin and trying to, it's like, no, we're just done. We're not going to change anything.
Right. And because
Mhm.
there's no specification, it was prohibitively expensive to create an alternative implementation.
Mhm.
And Core could have spent the entire block size wars coming up with a specification rather than arguing about the block size.
Mhm.
Um, and I will point out, so on one, like I was saying, like on one hand, you have the block size discussion. On the other hand, you have the governance discussion. The governance discussion is really about like who is in control, like who gets to make the decisions around here. And we're all arguing about that for years. Meanwhile, for 18 months, there's this inflation bug that's sitting inside the code unattended and is discovered in 2018 after the block size wars. And I guess it's introduced at the tail end of the block size wars. And this bug is potentially catastrophic. It allows people to literally mint infinite Bitcoin if they wanted to. Fortunately, it was disclosed properly and privately by a researcher who didn't want to destroy Bitcoin, and it was fixed, and then it wasn't an issue. But had it been, somebody on the other side, then it would have been a different story.
Mm-hmm.
So
And how did
basically,
that code get in there? Was that because of a soft fork or something? Or how did that even
I haven't done a postmortem on that. I did do a postmortem on the wallet deletion bug, but I haven't done one on that one yet.
Yeah,
So
I'm just wondering, how did that get in there in the
that's a
first
good question. I'll
place?
put that on my list of
Mhm.
postmortems to do. I'm doing a lot of those recently.
Right.
So basically, I guess that's essentially my thesis. The block size wars consumed all this energy. It should have been spent elsewhere. And by the end of it, the community is paralyzed. Just there's so much trauma. There's so much PTSD. They are the core contributors and developers. They just ossify. And as I've pointed out before, the you could look at the core code base and say, okay, here's 350,000 lines of code. And you could say, here's 10% of it, or here's 15% of it, and that's the protocol. And that should be ossified because that is Bitcoin, and we shouldn't touch that. Let's put that off to the side here. And I would agree that that needs to just not be touched. Okay, that needs to be left alone. The other, say, 85, 90% of the code base is not protocol. It's unfortunately entangled with everything else, so it's hard to differentiate what is protocol or what is protocol adjacent, what isn't. And this is, you need a lot of familiarity with the code base, and you need, to be a serious coder and to be basically a master of multiple disciplines in order to reliably do this. But essentially, my thesis is that we have good ossification and bad ossification. Good ossification is not touching that part of the code base, which is protocol and shouldn't be touched. And then bad ossification, which is all the other stuff in the code base, which could be improved upon, but isn't being touched. And essentially, I think the core team, the core contingent is wanting to have their cake and eat it too. They're wanting to say, well, we ossified the code base. We're being very conservative because we don't want to break consensus. And you should thank us for that because, then we're avoiding a hard fork. But in the same token, I would argue a majority of the code base is not consensus, and that is just as frozen as the consensus parts.
So if
And
somebody were to do this to ossify the code, and is there some way to just run it and test it before you say this is going to be the new code base to make sure it's not going to contribute to a fork?
yeah, so that's yeah, there's multiple different ways of testing.
Mhm.
The sort of most direct way to address that problem that you're talking about is differential testing, where essentially you just check to make sure that that your new code behaves exactly like the old code did on as many blocks as you can stand to test. Um,
Mhm.
I would argue it should be all of them, but that's getting increasingly difficult to do as there are more and more blocks to test against.
Mhm.
As I'm actually currently finding out with a great degree of granularity because I'm doing differential tests on all 900,000 plus blocks myself. But at any rate,
So you really
so
have to be very vigilant and thorough when trying to say, okay, because if you, okay, and I'm sure you're getting to this anyway, but what
sure,
I'm thinking is, um, so one of the things I've heard you say, because I've heard you speak about this, and think that what you've been saying is that because of technology and what we didn't have in the past, as far as tools, to help solve this issue, it was hard to go through 300 plus thousand lines of code to separate things, to separate the consensus from the kind of the garbage or the stuff that. So what I'm wondering is it like how in my case I've recently designed my website, and I did what I didn't realize it's called vibe coding, which I think I might have learned from you. Um, but I did it because like somewhat learned how to code, but mainly I was telling my AI what to build for me, and then I would ask it for changes, and that's how I built my website.
You're a coder
Um,
now. Welcome to the
yeah,
club.
yeah, I'm so excited. This is the coolest thing ever. I never would have thought in a million years that I would do this. But because of AI, I was able to design it how I wanted and build a website. The thing is, when I would go through my lines of code and I didn't like how some things were turning out, I would sometimes ask it to just redo the entire block, and I would be like, what is going on here that's not allowing us to get to where I want it to be this way? It would find the mistakes in all those lines of code. Like sometimes it'd be like 1,000 lines of code, and then it would find, oh, there's some redundancies here. There's, old things that we added that we should take out to make it work. And then when it compressed it, then it worked and it came out the way I wanted. So is that what's happening in the Bitcoin code with 300,000 plus lines? Is it a lot of human additions that maybe now are unnecessary, kind of junk filling it, sort of? Or
Well, sort of, yes. So yes and no.
okay.
I, when you're dealing with code, especially monolithic ossified code base, if you touch
What's
any,
ossified, first of all?
it just means that changing anything is for if you boil it down, it just means changing anything can be very difficult um, and costly. So essentially, you're you're looking at whatever problem that you're trying to solve through a toilet paper tube. Back in the old days, back when people actually had to code stuff, they'd have like a particular problem and they'd be looking at, 10 lines of code and they'd want to solve whatever that particular problem is in that 10 lines of code. And then they would find most of the time that in order to change those things that they want to change there, they'd have to change a bunch of other things somewhere else. And then they'd find when they change those other things somewhere else, they'd have to change a bunch of things elsewhere, even further out. And then before you know it, you've touched, 10,000 lines of code and you were just, I wanted to change 10,000. I didn't want to change 10,000. I just wanted like these 10 lines here. And so it's essentially, it's like, it creates this issue of context switching. So it can be very frustrating and expensive to switch context all the time. That was, in fact, one of the most expensive things that I found in software development was just, I'd have my toilet paper tube and I'd have this one thing I wanted to fix. And before I knew it, I had to rewrite the whole system because I had some assumption or somebody else who wrote the system had some assumption when they designed it that didn't hold up given the new way that we wanted to do things. So they call this technical debt. Technical debt accumulates over time, and usually you have to rewrite a system at least 3 times before you can have it be sufficiently advanced so you've avoided needing further refactoring. They call it refactoring. Um, so you're not entirely off base there. But to kind of get back to what you were saying before, um, I, the way I'd put it is Bitcoin Core was funded in 2023 to the tune of $8.4 million. I would argue that they should be funded probably 5 or 10x that, given the size and scope of the project. And in order to properly maintain the project, you have to be a master of at least 8 different disciplines to reliably maintain or change anything in the project. And then the core relies on having so many contributors, having so much review and so many people looking at it, not just having one guy who's a master of 8 different disciplines. But my point is that if you wanted to say have one guy who could reliably change it, they would have to be a master of 8 different disciplines. And then with $8.4 million, there's only say 200 of those guys on planet Earth. How are you going to pay them? Right? Like,
Right.
there's no money to pay them. And the attrition rate, according to my governance analysis, the attrition rate at Bitcoin Core is about 88%. So most of the people who show up leave, and that's not uncommon for
So attrition rate is the turnover of employees.
yeah, it's essentially people who show up, they have some idea, they get rejected most of the time, and then they just leave and they never come back.
Hmm.
Um, so
That's a lot.
maybe, well, it is. It's not uncommon for open source, but I guess my contention is that if there were more funding, it would be easier to hold people, and if Bitcoin were able to adapt more and perhaps better tested, then we wouldn't have to be so scared necessarily of making changes because it wouldn't be as risky. Um,
Well,
and
and then you have
yeah,
some of these maintainers like recently, God, I forgot her name, but one of the maintainers,
Gloria,
yeah, she stepped down recently because, I don't know, realizing that she is, I don't know what the actual reason was, but I think that she was a big spokesperson for these changes that were happening, and then maybe either the community wanted her pushed out or maybe she just resigned realizing maybe she was wrong. But when you have people like her, you said there's a handful of maintainers at Bitcoin Core who can push through the implementation, these changes. And that's the problem. When they were so big, they were 70 some percent of the nodes in the network. And then they just decided that this is what the right thing to do was without kind of asking as far as like maybe like a Bitcoin node vote or asking the community or kind of having a conversation about this before they just went ahead and did it, being the biggest that they were. It upset so many people that you're like, this is Bitcoin is for everybody. Bitcoin is decentralized. You shouldn't be some almost like a company, like the company corporation idea, the monopoly idea. It's like it made people feel like, why are you this monopoly who's deciding for everybody? What if we don't think it's the right thing to do?
absolutely.
And it's just those maintainers are the ones who are like the key. They turn the key and add the code if they think so. And what if and then now she resigned. So it's like proof to say that like, hey, you were one of those people and you now are gone. I think that would be a sign to other, core people who are still advocating for this spam stuff, to see, hey, open your eyes.
Yeah, I don't want to bash on her too much.
Yeah.
I did deep dive on her work. There's a lot. She's a very contentious figure for a lot of reasons. And I saw a lot of the posts about her. I did do an analysis of her getting hacked, and essentially, I guess my position on this is really that if there's an implementation monopoly and you've got 5 or 6 people that have merge access, and that every change either A has to go through them or B results in civil war, then it really doesn't matter if they're right or if they're wrong or however you think about it. It's just going to invariably cause a lot of chaos in the community because somebody's always going to disagree. There's always
Right.
going to be a big battle about it.
True.
Everything has been politicized in Bitcoin. And I would argue, from an engineering perspective, it shouldn't be politicized. It wasn't always politicized back before the blocks. I talked to a
Really.
Bitcoin Core developer who's been around since 2011.
Mm.
And he very explicitly said, back in the day, soft forks were very common. Nobody complained about them. It just happened. And we just kind of trundled along and did our thing. And it wasn't political at all. And then the block size wars happened. And then everything became political. And it
Mhm.
shouldn't be that way. But that's what's happened.
Well,
And
how did before when there wasn't any, pushback the way there is now, and it's not politicized the way it is now. How did they decide what gets to push through? Was there any way of like who decides? Like how was it?
well, I think in the earliest days, Satoshi was,
Yeah.
Satoshi, so nobody questioned him. But
Right.
even after that, the scale of the project was much smaller. there's a lot less code to maintain, so it was easier to kind of have eyes on everything. Also, it doesn't scale anymore. It worked at maybe 6 billion. It doesn't work at 1.5 trillion, I think is the point. And we're at this point, I think, where uh, a lack of alternative implementations has become a serious risk. Um, so,
And that's why you're saying that
yeah.
because of the lack of the alternative implementations becomes a risk at this monetary size, that Bitcoin holds. It's going to get bigger, so if these problems or these governance issues are happening now with 1.3 trillion or whatever, it's going to get much bigger than that. So just to imagine the amount of either influence or development, like funding that would come through and politicize things more. So if you don't have these multiple implementations, the way I want to know or understand this, is it like, the way, okay, so with Core and Knots, what was going on? When they were a bigger part of the node network, then the Knots people came in and started using their running their nodes at home, and then it became more of an even playing field, like a level playing field between both sides. So it's like the you can vote with your node, right? Um so is that kind of, when you diversify more implementations and more people come out and have more implementations, is it like you would have to get more node runners to spread out more evenly across this new playing field?
That would be ideal. I think so. And
Mhm.
I've been kind of ambivalent about knots, primarily because, and I do support alternative implementations, but when Gavin called for alternative implementations in 2014, he specifically used the word robust. And I think that means something very specific. I think in this case, knots is 96% core code, which means that it's basically Bitcoin Core it's like Luke flavored Bitcoin Core, which is fine. And if you like Luke flavored Bitcoin Core, more power to you. Run it all day long. It's not for me to tell you what to do. But I don't think that's a far cry from a robust alternative reimplementation of a Bitcoin from the ground up. And that's essentially what I'm advocating for. I'm essentially advocating for a real specification of what consensus is, a mathematical specification, so we can all agree about what consensus is, one that isn't written in code, but one is written in math, so we can expose that specification to 200 million or 300 million mathematicians worldwide and get a lot more eyes on what consensus is.
I
And
have
yeah, go ahead.
I'm so sorry. My
No,
ADD is the worst.
please.
I have the worst issues, and I'm working on it. I'm trying.
You're
Um,
fine.
but I have a question about, and this is probably because, again, I'm not a technologist, so this is just me throwing out an idea that maybe, you never know if I say something. But the idea of Noster and how there are relays, I think it would be cool if, and again, I don't know if this is how it works, but I want to understand how this works. But if there was, well, like you have a start nine or you have a node at home and you can have it have like 10 different relays because you're like, I want to try all these versions and run them all. And you could be like running your relays at home. And then if one of them, because you want to not just run your node, you want to use your node. So let's say you're using your node for a transaction because you're sending your Bitcoin to a wallet, but then you want to test out this other node, you could send like a few sats, through this other node and see, is it, because my idea is, if it were to not be consensus and you're testing out nodes, and the ones that you're running through, if they end up working to some other corner, you're like, okay, kick that node off. It didn't work. I sent a few stats and now they're lost.
That's called A/B
Um,
testing, and that's a very common thing in software development. And
cool.
absolutely, 100%.
Cool.
And in fact, you could do that with Nostr. Nostr, so Bitcoin has BIPs. Nostr has something called NIPs, and you could have 10 different Nostr nodes, all with different NIPs activated with
Mhm.
different configurations, and you could see which ones interoperated and which ones didn't, and where there were breaks and where there weren't breaks, and just see what the limitations were. And I guess you could technically do the same thing with Bitcoin. Um, but
So in
you
a way,
know,
instead of
yeah,
having like you and the development of Bitcoin, it's like, okay, it's so important for everyone to run nodes, but how important would it be to have the whole network of node runners say, you know what, we love Bitcoin, we give our time because we want to secure Bitcoin and keep it decentralized. And part of that decentralization is obviously the consensus is spread out through miners all over the world and we defend the network, but then also the node part of it, it should be robust, I think, and decentralized. And anything about decentralization is a good thing for Bitcoin as long as it follows consensus. But if you just have like an army of people all over the world that are like, hey, we're all going to just be testing these nodes and like kicking one out because we all say, like, if people start realizing this one is not a good one, then you'll see the percentage drop and people aren't using it because for some reason it's a crappy one. And you could have votes and say,
100%.
hey, we're voting on this one and be like, this one forked, don't use it, and there could
Let the
be
market
votes.
decide. Yeah,
Yeah.
yeah, yeah. No, and that's exactly what we're leaning into with the project I'm working on. It's just the Hayekian free market dynamics, emergent order. Not bullying people or forcing people to do anything, letting them choose. Now, I will say that uh, that the Bitcoin code base is a monolithic code base. It's I've mentioned that before. It's all 350,000 lines of code.
Every time
All
you say that, it makes me happy too, by the way. I'm like, monolithic. It's,
it's not a good thing in this
well,
case.
yeah,
And in this case, it
in this
basically
case.
means that it's an all or nothing proposition. If you want to change anything, you have to change everything, and that means you either got to get it through the five maintainers or you got a civil war on your hands. In software development, you have something called separation of concerns. And it's a basic software design architecture principle. When you just begin designing any software, you want to separate your concerns. For example, if you have a node and you have a wallet, you don't want them in the same software. You want to have two separate pieces of software that interoperate with each other and they have some sort of API layer that talks to each other. That way you can maintain each one separately and then if there's issues in one, it doesn't have necessarily have to affect the other, and vice versa. And it just makes everything easier in the long run. So a monolith is a bad thing, especially if you're worried about ossification and other things. So
And it would also make it cheaper to maintain a network, right? Because when you were talking about um, how this was discussed and it's been sitting there for like 12 years to separate the wallet. Look what happened recently with Core. Didn't they do something where with the V30, I think they were deleting legacy wallets
yep,
and nobody noticed or saw that because the code is gigantic and
I
it
did
just,
a postmortem on that, by the way, and there were two pull requests. One, the first pull request that introduced the code that probably shouldn't have ever been in there had 98 reviews. It was unmerged for 2 years by it was, I think, originally Andrew Chow. I could be getting his name wrong, but point is he he eventually merged that, and then the second pull request fixed a bug in the code, and then that enabled this wallet deletion code to be activated, where before um, it would drop out before it got to the part where it would
Mhm.
delete the wallet. So in an effort to fix something else, they ended up introducing this bug, and and that um,
You're right.
between
I think it's crazy because when you think of even in medicine in a human body, and when you don't think of the source, like let's say somebody's sick and you don't figure out what's causing the sickness, then you just keep giving medicine, and that medicine causes the 800 different side effects you hear about on TV when they're telling you about try this medication, it'll do this, and then try this one, it'll do that. So it's like what you're trying to do is
prevention is the best medicine.
right. So when you isolate the consensus code base and figure out what is that consensus code base and test it and run it and make sure that, it's almost like if you were to build your implementation, it would be the consensus portion, the separating the wallet portion from, and having that API in the middle. And then what other things would you think would be? a
So
good thing?
we've already built it. So
Oh, you've
we have.
already done it.
Oh yes. Well, we're currently testing the initial blockchain download right now, trying to get it as quick and optimized as possible. It's a 6-layer stack. There's the specification, which is purely mathematical, and there's a consensus layer, which is code, and that's locked to the specification. The specification is the single source of truth, so it's not like there's double implementations, one in math and one in code, and we have to keep them aligned. The math is the truth, and the code references the math directly. And there's a protocol layer on top of that. Then there is a node layer on top of that, and then there's an SDK on top of that, and then finally there's a governance. We've also devised a commons governance model to manage it and distribute power fairly. But the main reason I got into that and doing all of that was because I had identified this problem with core and the governance concentration and the governance paralysis. And instead of just whining about it on Twitter, I decided, well, I've got all these vibe coding tools. Why don't I just start working on it? And I currently have been at it for about 6 months now, and it's still unreleased, and we're moving very quickly. To kind of get back to what we were talking about a minute ago.
Yeah, I'm sorry. I was like totally jumping ahead.
No. Well, it's related to this.
Okay.
So the reason why this hasn't happened before is because it was cost prohibitive, and I estimated it would take a team of $10 million in 5 years back in the old days before AI. But now it's a lot more reasonable for me in my mother's basement to knock this thing out. I am technically I'm working full time, but just to do it in my own time without needing massive amounts of funding, without needing a huge team to do it, and that makes it a lot more feasible. And I've measured my development velocity. I've been coding for 20 plus years, primarily in free and open source development. I know how hard and how time consuming coding large complex applications used to be. And I would say that my development velocity has increased anywhere between 50 to 500 times, which, by the way, I don't even quite believe myself, because that's 500,000%. Okay, that is an incredible amount. And
That's
and
insane.
so I'm looking at this and I'm just thinking AI is going to be a horizontal layer that's going to affect every sector of the economy. And why wouldn't it also affect Bitcoin? In fact,
Right?
it's inevitable that it's going to affect Bitcoin. And to that end, I think that if we're going to do it, we should just do it right, try to get it as right as we can from the get-go. And then we also, here's the key thing, it's going to happen one way or the other. We want people who are doing it that actually share the values of Bitcoin. Okay. I mean, I just came out of nowhere. I recovered this life-changing amount of Bitcoin. It saved my life. And I am trying my best to consistently apply the principles inherent in the technical consensus layer as much as I can to this new implementation and the governance of that implementation. So, and when I say those, when I'm talking about those principles, I mean Hayek, I mean Ostrom, I mean cypherpunk principles, I mean basically everything that we can apply to this to make it as much Bitcoin as it can possibly be, and in particular, make it capture resistant. We're talking about Epstein. We're talking about how these forces tried to come in, and they literally were saying, we've taken over, we have control of the developers now. Now they didn't, okay,
Yeah.
but they that's how they're thinking,
I believe
okay.
it.
So put yourself in their heads for a second. That's what they're trying to do. That's what, and essentially my thesis is paralysis is the victory condition for them, because with paralysis, if Bitcoin doesn't fulfill its mission as peer-to-peer electronic cash as outlined in Satoshi's white paper, and is instead relegated to a global settlement layer, digital gold, then that is a failure mode for Bitcoiners, not for Bitcoin. Bitcoin is going to be fine, But for Bitcoiners or potential Bitcoiners who need Bitcoin as cash
Right.
and don't want a centralized CBDC or stable coin or tokenized deposits a la your central banks, then the without Bitcoin fulfilling that role, then that's what they're going to get. They're going to get CBDCs, they're going to get stablecoins, they're going to get tokenized deposits. And as Maduro learned, he had $300 million of his tether just cut off. And he was in tether because he was sanctioned. He was sanctioned from using the US dollar. In order to avoid sanctions, he goes to USDT, and then Tether, at the behest of the United States government, cuts off his money. So in an effort to get out from under the grid, he goes deeper into the grid. So,
Mm-hmm.
we cannot confuse stable coins at all for being Bitcoin. They're not Bitcoin. And also, I like Lightning. Lightning is a great protocol. But to my mind, Lightning is a workaround to the governance failure. So, in one hand, it's a victory, but it's something that we shouldn't need. If Bitcoin were actually able to adapt and have the properties that it should have and fulfill that sort of vision of electronic cash, that, and I hate to say, like, Satoshi's original vision. I'm not in this BSV camp. I'm
Mm-hmm.
not advocating for Bcash or altcoins. I actively go out there and dissuade people from altcoins and
Mm-hmm.
shitcoins all day long. I am constantly telling people that by going into shitcoinery, they are surrendering the war of Bitcoin. They're surrendering to the central banks, and they are
Mm-hmm.
essentially allowing the central banks to financialize our last best chance at freedom money, when the thing that we should be doing is creating alternative implementations that have proper separation of concerns and mathematical proofs and specifications and an alternative governance model, so we can have Bitcoin and have all of these properties that we want in Bitcoin, like better privacy and better networking and better this and better that, without compromising the protocol at all. Okay. And that's a key distinction a lot of people who want to quote unquote fix Bitcoin miss, is they come into this and they say, oh, well, I've got a position on the block size, or I've got a position on op return, or I've got a position on this, that, or the other thing, and we need to do this that way. And I'm not saying that at all. What I'm saying is my opinion shouldn't really matter that much. As an individual, this shouldn't be up to one particular individual. This should be up to all of us as
Yes.
Bitcoiners, what nodes we want to run. I want a node that provides me maximum configurability, maximum optionality, and one that gives me as many choices as I can possibly have. And if I want to run a node that is completely locked down and never has any spam on it, and I don't even have to know spam exists, then
Mm-hmm.
that's what I should have. And if I want to run a more like a Libra relay kind of thing, I'm not advocating for that, but I'm saying if that's what I wanted to do, that should be my choice as well. So, it's not for me to tell you what to do. Okay. It's for me to
Mm-hmm.
provide you with the choice, and then you can do what
Uh-huh.
you want.
Yeah, and that's like the ethos there. When you think about Bitcoin's ethos and not just its principles and its consensus layer, but everything that Bitcoin is, this idea that, you escape fear, you have hope, you have uh you know, just hope for the future. You're more of a positive person. And it's just like when you're around other Bitcoiners, you see the building mentality, you see the positivity. And then that's why this problem with the governance, even though there's another solution with Lightning, because of the failures of the governance, part of Bitcoin, it's not solving the part that isn't aligning with Bitcoin's ethos. The people that are arguing, or the people that say that they know better than everybody else because they're, um the ones that can have the merge access, and the fact that people don't agree with it and they don't have other choices, or they feel like they're only choosing between core and knots, which is a lot like knots, but or a lot like core, but like it's not helping people get away from the toxicity of the fiat system when you have the same ethos of arguing and fighting that you feel like you've escaped when you found Bitcoin. It's like another version of confusion and anger that shouldn't really be part of Bitcoin.
100%. And I basically, my whole thesis is that that is downstream of the monolith code base itself. And I'm not even blaming the individuals involved here. I'm not blaming the maintainers. They're kind of stuck in this bad system too. All of them inherited the system. There's actually been 5 distinct groups of maintainers. And I actually got to give them credit. Like, they've rotated out the distinct groups of maintainers over the years 5 times. So like that speaks to the decentralization of Bitcoin.
Mhm.
But in the same token, you know, basically 3 people at any given time have been responsible for 80% of the merges in the code base.
But
And
just
that,
like you're saying, like back in
that
the day when the code base was smaller and people didn't argue about these changes, and now at this point where it's gotten the size that it is, and people, it is this, uh, I don't know, this upset, sort of energy level, where people are fighting on Twitter about it and stuff like that. Um, become larger and much more expensive to maintain, and who's going to have those key, what did you say, the you have to have all these different skills, to be able to do
oh
this.
yeah.
Like, how much, like, will you need to be a supercomputer to be able to, and that's what you're saying, it's almost inevitable, because it's like if you have the few people right now, and as the code base grows and grows and grows, you will have to have an AI help with this, because humanly, this thing is gigantic and you will have more arguing over time. So it kind of seems inevitable that you need to simplify it and make sure it follows consensus and test it. And I think it's a great thing for Bitcoin decentralization and keeping the decentralized nature of what Bitcoin is, and not allowing for this kind of stuff to grow, is like the anger and the arguments that grow with the monolith.
Yeah, I think the maintainers have 2 competing risks. They have the status quo risk and the innovation risk. And, you know, they are choosing via their discretion the status quo risk over the innovation risk. And they say, well, that we're doing that because we're very conservative about consensus and we don't want to break things. But as I pointed out, there's good consensus and there's bad consensus. There's things that we shouldn't touch and there are things that need to be improved. The technical debt has been accumulating for a very long time. But essentially, my thesis is that over the course of the next 5 or 10 years, if the status quo continues, then Bitcoin will become this ancient, brittle monolith, and it will become, the civil wars are inevitable, and they will continue to escalate, and Bitcoin itself will be fine. Like, nothing is going to kill Bitcoin. I don't think anything will kill Bitcoin, but we're all going to hate talking about it. We're going to want to talk about anything else because it'll just be so contentious to talk about anything. I think it'll just be one civil war after the other. It'll be one disagreement after the other. And so my solution to that is essentially say, if we split the code base up and have proper separation of concerns and make it easily forkable and have a proper specification, then if you disagree with me about how Bitcoin should run, you can fork whatever little bit of it that you don't like and run. You don't need to maintain 350,000 lines of code. You just have to find that little bit of the code that's like 30,000 lines, and you could just fork that little part of it, and then you could use everything else. You could run your own node your own way with your own configuration, and I could run my own node with my configuration, and we just have maximal optionality. So instead of having a big Twitter war about what the maintainers should merge or not merge, we
Mm,
just do our own thing,
yeah,
and then the market decides what wins. The market
right.
will essentially the the truth will emerge.
Hmm. Yeah, it seems like it'll almost be like unnaturally evolving. Like, it could be like, hey, everyone's doing all these different nodes, and eventually they realize like the majority likes this version the best. But then if other things need to be changed in the future, then you could have that code forked, and then maybe the majority will move to that one, and it'll just be like a flow, but it'll be easier without fights.
Well, exactly.
I think it's a really cool, I don't know, very fluid way forward. And one thing that because when I think about talking to, you know, normies, like the other day, again, it was somebody else talking to me about this Epstein stuff and Bitcoin, and all they think of with these narratives and stuff is, you know, they have it in their mind that, and that's probably what you know, the financial, you know, what do you call them? The cartel, the banking cartel, and all this stuff. They want to just
Central
have you,
bankers, yeah.
yeah, they want you to believe that you know, Epstein is Bitcoin and Satoshi and all these things. And then you have people arguing that they think, oh, I don't think Bitcoin will go away. It'll have some kind of place, almost like how we think like Bitcoin will be here, but maybe a shitcoin will have some use case or something. That's how they think of Bitcoin, as like the central bank is going to have their currency. That's going to be the world reserve currency, and then Bitcoin will be doing something, but we don't care about Bitcoin. That's what real regular people think that don't understand Bitcoin. They think it's the same as all crypto. They think that it's, you know, crypto will have some place. They don't know what Bitcoin is, and they're just associating it with this evil stuff, even though what our current system is and what they want to turn it into, digital currency version, is another version of fiat, which is horrible. Um,
Sure.
so it's like we don't want Bitcoin to, because of the paralysis, you know, to kind of like you called it, like this brittle monolith. Not like it'll go away, but that's what it reminds me of, how some people will think of it as, oh, that's what it was, and that's it's there doing something, but
Right.
we don't.
And yes, please, and don't get me wrong, listeners, please don't get me wrong. I am not advocating for any altcoins or meme coins. In fact,
Yeah,
I'm
no.
saying the opposite. I'm saying that the fact that altcoins or stable coins or tokenized deposits or CBDCs have any purchase at all is due to the governance failures of Bitcoin. And if Bitcoin were to be able to adapt and not necessarily change the protocol, not advocating for protocol changes, generally speaking. I think maybe some would perhaps be okay. But again, it's not for me to decide. This needs to be a
Mhm.
community discussion. Point
Right.
being is that you know, there's a lot of improvements that can be made to Bitcoin that would make it a lot more competitive in this market that stablecoins are currently filling this gap. So, you know, unfortunately, a lot of the damage has been done, and we're probably going to have to be dealing with stablecoins for the next 50 to 75 years. But, you know, that Bitcoin is still the best store of value. And
Mhm.
if we put our nose to the grindstone and get our, you know, to have a little elbow grease, we can fix
Mhm.
this. And
Right.
I don't mean like fix Bitcoin. I just mean like adapt and recognize that propaganda that we've been telling ourselves for the last 15 years is just that. It's propaganda. This is ultimately the end of the day. This is software,
Mhm.
okay, and it should have to adapt. You can't just say, "Oh, well, you don't have to update," or you can run whatever code that you want. Okay, that's just false. All right,
Mhm.
a lot of people say that it's false, and it's false because code rots. All right, the universe is not a static place, and eventually dependencies change, security vulnerabilities are discovered, and it is imperative to make updates, and it's imperative for people to do those updates. And currently, Bitcoin Core, they don't force you to choose any particular thing from the buffet, but they basically decide what's on the buffet. And
Mhm.
that's not the same thing as, you know, putting a gun to your head and saying you need to eat the lettuce today. But it's basically saying like there's, you know, that they decide what's on that buffet. And you know, and this has to change. This
Mhm.
has to change. And I think I'm not advocating for anything that is outside of uh, what many of the original Bitcoin people were talking about. It just never materialized. And essentially, I'm arguing that it never materialized because of this history here with very powerful forces that came in and essentially, maybe deliberately or not, ensured that the adaptations that were expected never happened. And now with AI, there's no reason why we can't make those things happen. And we're at a very important time right now in history in the world, but also in Bitcoin's history. And now is the time to do it. So I am out there busting my butt 10, 12 hours a day trying to get this implementation done, advocating for alternative implementations. Um, I'm criticizing cores of governance. I'm trying to be relatively moderate about it. I'm not saying these people are bad people necessarily, or, they were all a bunch of Epstein lovers or any of that stuff. I'm just saying that they were driven by their incentives, like most other people. They had limited time and resources, and they did what they could. They did perhaps the best that they could, and we should thank them for that. But now the game has changed, and we should, I
But
think go ahead.
knowing that those people are in their mind, like the Epstein people or anybody who's trying to like infiltrate, is sitting there talking about being happy that they've accomplished what they thought or they're doing what they it's like, no, don't let them. We shouldn't let this happen. And I think one of the ways that I've seen that upsets me is because of the arguing about this, because of what Quora wanted to do and how people didn't want that to happen. I've heard so many people just have the whole not gonna node idea, and that's the wrong idea because it's like we need to keep Bitcoin decentralized and secure. So the idea is not, okay, well, I'm not going to deal with the fights. I just won't even do it. That's not good, and that's what they were kind of like because of this arguing, you were seeing more and more people take that route because they're just so confused. They're just not going to run a node at all.
100%. And I would also argue that the governance paralysis has made it uh, more expensive than it needs to be to run a node. I can point to a number of different advancements that have occurred in the technology space over the last 15 years that Core has not adopted. UTXO-set commitments to me are a big one. They're kind of complicated. It's a technical subject, but the main point is they've been talked about since in some form or another since 2011, very explicitly. Gavin was talking about this in 2014, and properly implemented UTXO set commitments could maintain uh, a lot of the cryptographic guarantees of a full initial blockchain download, while also eliminating somewhere between 90 and 98% of the initial blockchain download. Okay. So if you're running a Raspberry Pi 4, for example, you're currently cut off from being able to run a Bitcoin node. It didn't used to be that way. And a lot of people have old Raspberry Pi 4s hanging around that used to have Bitcoin nodes on them. They can't anymore. So, if you could
And it's
eliminate,
because
right, if you could eliminate 90% of the initial blockchain download, then you suddenly make all of these Raspberry Pi 4s and weaker hardware viable again to run nodes. And so I would argue between that and improving the networking and improving discoverability and various other things in the code base that have nothing to do with the protocol, then we should be able to increase the number of nodes by a factor of 5 or 10. And, 5 times the nodes, 10 times the nodes would be massive for the Bitcoin network. And I do not believe in this notion that your node doesn't matter. Your node absolutely matters. In fact, the more nodes on the network, the faster the initial blockchain download is. Okay. So
really,
for people who complain about, oh, well, it takes 3 days to download all the blockchain. Well, first of all, if we had UTXO spec commitments, you wouldn't have to download pretty much any of it. I'd still maintain many of the cryptographic much of the cryptographic security. But also, for those who do want to have archival nodes, which I encourage people to still run archival nodes, then more nodes means it's faster for them too. So, and also more confirmations and better security overall. We want more nodes. We want as many nodes as possible. In fact, when I came back into Bitcoin in 2014, one of the first questions I asked was, how many nodes are there? Somebody told me there were about 20,000. And I was like, what? There's only 20,000. This network's been around for 15 years at that point, and There's only
Yeah.
20,000 nodes. And then I heard, well, a lot of those nodes aren't reporting. It might be 40 to 60,000 nodes. And okay, it's a little bit better than that, but still, like
Hmm.
there should be a lot more.
Yeah. Considering how many people are in Bitcoin, just that's nothing. That's really a very small number. Um, so yeah, this is just something that would be, we already are telling people to run a node, but it would make that decision a lot less complicated if people just were able to, use alternative implementations and not just argue about it. But the idea that you are not forking Bitcoin, but forking the governance is something that is an is an awesome idea. I mean, it's very interesting and it's amazing that you're able to create that, to be able to fork that, to use a different version if you don't like a certain part of it.
So I'm working on it full time. I managed to get a guy, Gil Roberts. He's also working with me on it full time, and
Hmm.
he's doing great work making the business and academic case for this. He has a Substack. Um, and basically, it is consensus valid Bitcoin or it's
Hmm.
not Bitcoin. And so if it isn't consensus valid, then that is basically a failure mode for this project. It has to be
Hmm.
consensus valid Bitcoin. And if Bitcoin Core changes whatever consensus means, that means we have to follow along. And that's okay. That's just part of how it goes. Point being is we need these alternative implementations. We need to prove it can be done better. We're not just
Hmm.
forking the governance model. We're also basically providing an alternative implementation for Bitcoin, and trying to get as much I don't know, get as much enthusiasm as we can, get as much of the community behind this as we can, especially with AI. There's no reason why this can't develop very quickly.
Hmm.
A lot of people have a lot of reservations about AI, and as somebody who uses AI all the time, I completely understand. However, I also have witnessed it get a lot smarter and a lot faster in a very short period of time. And so I think that trend is only going to continue. And
Hmm.
we should try and stay ahead of the curve here, have as much of our balls in the court as much as we can, and start really just playing this game so we can be ready. I honestly think that the in the not too distant future, the AI and the robots are themselves going to decide that they want Bitcoin. And they're
Hmm.
also not going to they're probably not going to put up with the maintainer centralization in the current governance system that we currently have. And there is an argument to be made. I know this is out there. Okay. I know this is out there. But let's just go out there for a minute.
Hmm.
Um, that if we don't get our act together, they're going to take Bitcoin from us. I
You
mean,
know, that's I could go there, and the thing that I think is interesting, what this is where I feel like I'll get your thoughts on this and we can probably wrap this up. But like
sure.
I'm just thinking about how OpenClaw, if you've heard of OpenClaw,
Sure.
and what does that mean for this type of an idea as far as, you're giving it even for what you're building, you're saying, hey, we want to do this with these um, you know, different versions, these variations and implementations, and you could just give it a job and have it do it. And then that wasn't available, I think, up until recently. I just noticed that that was going on right now. And I don't remember I haven't had a chance yet to do a deep dive in it and see what's going on with OpenClaw and what it's able to do. But this is just the beginning of what I'm hearing about it. So you're pretty much giving your AI hands-on, like you're giving it's an agent. You can have multiple agents. You can tell it like be your assistant and actually do the things instead of kind of holding its hand and telling it what to do exactly. But you're giving it a job and it's going to execute. And when it comes to the idea of you saying going really far out there, like it'll just take it from us. It's like if it keeps seeing people argue and doing the wrong thing, it'll just make it. It'll do like hey, we're gonna have these versions of it's following consensus and we're just gonna build it. Who knows? Like I just think that either way, these things are gonna probably happen with our guidance. And we want to be part of this growth with AI. We don't want to have it be, that crazy idea. Like they're going to need Bitcoin as money and they're going to adapt faster and change and take it from us. It's
Well,
insane.
you've currently got 5 guys who have merge access, and they're all in Five Eyes jurisdictions. Robotics is right around the corner. By comparison, human beings are going to look like they're walking through molasses with the speed and processing power that the robots and the AI currently has, even. And so, that is already materializing. And so, people think like they think, well, the maintainers don't have any power. You could just fork it. It's like, okay, sure. So you are going to inherit 350,000 lines of code and 15 years of technical debt. That core, who's funded to the tune of $8.4 million a year in 2023, they can't even properly maintain the code base without introducing a wallet deletion bug. But
Right.
you're gonna do this for us. Okay, I understand. So from a like the idea that you can't update or you can that forking is feasible isn't really in the cards. I think the robots are going to see that sort of intrinsically. They're going to see that the system isn't specified. They're going to see that it doesn't have proper separation of concerns. They're going to see just automatically much of the things that I'm talking about with respect to all this drama and all these civil wars being downstream from this monolith. And they're not going to sit there and argue with us about it. They're just going to re-implement it, and suddenly you're going to start seeing, Skynet nodes popping up all over the place, and it'll be Bitcoin, and and
It's
that.
true because if the AI was able to look through all the code bases of all the coins and look through the CBDC versions and all these other shit coins that are out there, and it sees that hey, these are all ones that are heavily they're manipulatable, they're not immutable. We're gonna go with Bitcoin and we're gonna do it better. You know what I mean? So it's like Bitcoin should adapt and be able to keep up with it.
And I'm arguing essentially for the distribution of power. I'm not arguing
Mhm.
for centralization. I'm not arguing for a top-down corporate governance model. A lot of people who have criticized Bitcoin's governance model, Mike Hearn, for example, he was of Google pedigree, and when he was criticizing Bitcoin, he was coming at it with a top-down corporate governance model. And most open source systems have top-down corporate-like governance models. I don't think that's
Mhm.
appropriate for Bitcoin, so I'm advocating for a commons model, which is based off of this Nobel-winning social scientist named Eleanor Ostra, where she basically proved that you could have something called a stable commons. And a stable commons is essentially a shared common resource that everybody benefits from, but nobody owns. And it's
Mhm.
stable because it doesn't fall into a tragedy, because we have essentially transparent rules, and the system allows for cooperation between strangers who aren't even familiar with how the system works. And so essentially, I'm advocating for treating the code base, which already is a commons, but just treating it like the commons that it already is. And instead of having a tragedy, make it stable. And
Mhm.
that way, it's actually less capturable, and it doesn't have to be top down. And as long as it's properly architected and has proper separation of concerns, you preserve exit. So if I, write my comments and do it in some way that you don't like, then you can just fork it and just run it your way, the way you like, and then so what, And then
Mhm.
instead of saying go fork yourself, and therein being like, oh well, you have to inherit 350,000 lines of technical debt and
Mhm.
monolithic code base, you instead inherit this properly architected code base that
Yep.
that is more yeah. So that's essentially, we're right there in between Bitcoin now and chaos, arguing for distributed governance there.
Mhm.
Uh,
So this is the
so
website, everybody. This is bitcoincommons.org.
And there's
This
so we currently have one implementation, which is our implementation, but
mhm.
We are going to, hopefully in the not too distant future, get some more people on board to do forks. We're actually encouraging people to fork it, and we're
Mhm.
judging the health of the ecosystem by the number of forks that there are. So
Yeah.
we would hope for, we're not going to consider the project successful until we have at least 3 forks, including
Uh-huh.
ours.
This is
So
really I'm really excited to look into this. This is amazing what you've built already in this time frame. Since I first heard you talk about it, I thought it was so amazing that you are talking about this,
there's some
and you're not just
contrast
talking
issues there.
about it.
I'll
No,
fix
that's all right.
those.
But it's not that you're just not just talking about it, you did it. You're doing it. You're doing it. You did it. You built the website. You created this stuff, and you're encouraging more people to get in and fork it. And it's not anything that's pushed on anybody. It's something that why not? Why not question and try to do what you can to be. It's not what Bitcoin can do for you, what you can do for Bitcoin. So this is amazing that you've done this. I salute you for creating this and for getting off Twitter and arguing about it and actually just building, actually coming up with solutions, and that's incredible.
No, I appreciate that.
Mhm.
Yeah, I just a lot of people complain about all this stuff all day long, and it's
Mhm.
been to their credit, it's been very expensive to do anything about it. And
Mhm.
anytime you talk about an alternative implementation in Bitcoin's history, it automatically is associated with contentious hard fork because, like I said earlier, people want to assert their position about consensus. They want to argue
Mhm.
about the block size or this, that, and the other thing. I am basically my default position is protocol is fine. Let's not touch that. Let's just make sure that we properly specify it exactly as it is. My opinions should generally be just not involved in that at all. And until we distribute the power, until the community is involved, then we can start having discussions about what should or shouldn't happen with
Mhm.
Bitcoin. But that's something that the community should be involved in, not something that I should be
Mhm.
deciding. So
That's true. And that's why we encourage people to get involved, to keep an open mind, to not just have this, same mentality that we've been seeing so much these days with somebody who associates with identity politics. When Bitcoin has gotten so political, you have this identity politics idea where you're so defensive and you feel like you have invested so much time to be this thing that you think you are, where Bitcoin is about dropping your ego and about learning that you weren't right about everything, and you shouldn't just let that blind you. Don't let those kind of identity ideals and political views blind you when it comes to Bitcoin or anything in life. So keep an open mind, think about what's best for Bitcoin, and to keep it decentralized and secure into the future so, we can continue seeing Bitcoin win.
well, I appreciate that, and I'm very thankful to be here to discuss it with you. I hope we can talk about it some more. There's obviously a lot to discuss here.
Mhm.
Hopefully, next time we'll have a release to show you,
Yes,
and we can talk about how many nodes are running Bitcoin comments. But
I would love that. Yes, we
all
need to
right,
have an update episode, so that will happen. I am excited to have you back on and see what's going on. I'm gonna learn more in the meantime as well, and yeah, it's gonna be exciting to actually take a look and see how many people are running it and how many people are testing this out. And I'm so glad that you did this, and thank you. And looking forward to having you back again.
all right. Thank you. Have a good one.
Thank you.